Now in this lecture, we are going to implement activity selection problem in practice using Java programming language. Now here, the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create a class for activity. So in this class, we are going to have three properties, which will be the name of activity, start time, and finish time of activity. So I'm just going to create a new file over here and name it activity.java. And inside this file, I'm going to create activity class. So the name of class will be like this: public class activity. And inside this class, we are going to have three properties. So the first property will be private string name, in which we are going to save the name of the activity. Then the second property will be start time. So here I'm going to set it as a type of integer, so start time. And the third property will be private int finish time. So then inside constructor, we are going to initialize these properties over here, because we are going to get these properties from the user when we are creating the activities. So inside constructor is going to be like this: activity, public activity. So it will take three parameters. So the first parameter will be the type of string name, and the second parameter will be the type of integer start time, and the third parameter also will be the type of integer finish time. Then inside constructor, we are going to initialize the name, start time, and finish time that we created over here. So it's going to be like this: this name is equal to name, this start time is equal to start time. So this is the time that we are getting from the parameter over here. Then the third one will be this finish time will be equal to finish time. Now with this, we have successfully created our activity class over here. Now here, I'm just going to create some other helper functions over here, which will be responsible for getting activity name, for setting activity name, for getting the start time, and for setting the start time. And same functions will be for getting finish time and setting finish time. So because here we have created the properties private, so this means that we cannot access these properties from outside of this class. So that's why for these properties, I'm just going to create some other functions over here quickly. So I'm just going to declare first method like this. So this will return the type of string, and the name of method will be getName, so which will be responsible for getting the name of activity. So it's obvious that this method will not take any parameters, so it's just going to return name. So for setting name, I'm going to create another method like this, public void. So it's not going to return anything, but here it's going to take as a parameter string name. So what we are going to do over here is we are going to set this name is equal to name. So we are getting from this parameter. So I'm going to copy these functions from here and do the same operations for start and end time. So the way of writing the functions like this is a professional approach. So that's why it's better to write functions like this. So here, instead of string, it's going to return integer, and the name of function will be get start time. So in this case, it's going to return start time. So I'm just going to copy the start time from here and paste it over here. Set start time. So in this case, it's going to take the integer type. So start time. So this start time is equal to start time. So this function is responsible for getting the start time, and this function is responsible for setting the start time. So similarly, I'm going to do the same operations for finish time. So in this case, get finish time and set finish time. So in this case, when we are getting the finish time, it's going to return finish time. And in this case, when we are setting the finish time, it's going to set the finish time. So in this case, it's going to be like this, finish time. So as a parameter, it's obvious that it's going to take finish time. And inside this function, we are going to set this finish time is equal to finish time. So with this, we have finished our helper functions inside this activity class. Then at the end, I'm going to edit the toString function. So in this case, whenever we are calling print function for this activity class over here, it's going to return the value that we are editing over here. So that's why for toString function, I'm going to write override. So this means that we are overriding the toString function over here. So in this case, it's going to be like this: public string toString. So it's obvious that it's not going to take any parameter. As a return value, I'm going to put something like this: activity plus name, start time, and finish time. So return type will be like this: activity. So then I'm going to put the name of activity. So here it's going to be like this. So I'm going to concatenate the name of activity, then plus start time is equal to, I'm going to concatenate start time, then one more time plus finish time is equal to plus finish time. So with this, we have successfully implemented our activity class over here. Now we are going to use this activity class inside activity selection problem. So that's why for activity selection, I'm going to create another class over here, which will be responsible for solving the activity selection problem. So in this case, it's going to be like this. So I'm going to create a new file, which will be the activity selection. So activity selection.java. So inside this file, we are going to create our activity selection class. So the name of class will be like this: public class activity selection, like this. Now before continuing to implement our class over here, first I'm going to import some libraries over here. So the first library that I'm going to import is going to be ArrayList, because in this case we are going to use ArrayList inside this activity class. So it's going to be like this: java util.ArrayList. Now the second library that we are going to import will be the collection, because we are going to use the collections for ordering the activities. So in this case, it's going to be the util.collections. Then the third one that we are going to import will be the comparator, because in this case we are going to compare the activities based on their finish times, as we discussed in our previous lecture. So that's why we need to edit the comparator over here to take the finish time. So that's why it's going to be like this: comparator. Now with this, we have successfully implemented all three libraries that we need inside this activity selection class over here. Now the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create activity selection method. So in this case, it's going to be like this. So public void activity selection will be ArrayList with the type of activity. So in this case, it's going to be activity list. Then we are going to implement comparator over here, in which we are going to specify based on which variable we want to compare these activity lists over here. So in this case, as we said before, we are comparing it based on the finish time. So that's why I'm going to edit the comparator like this. So in this case, this comparator will be the user defined comparator. So comparator activity, so will be the finish time comparator is equal to new comparator with a type of activity. Then here I'm going to override the function of compare, because in this case, as we said before, we are going to compare the activities based on their finish time. So in this case, it's going to be like this: override. So I'm going to override the public int compare function. So in this case, it's going to take the type of activity. So first will be the O1, activity 1, and the second will be activity 2, because in this case we are going to compare activities. Then inside this function, we are going to return O1 dot get finish time minus O2 dot get finish time. So as we said before, we have declared this get finish time inside as activity class over here. So we are using this function that we declared over here. Then the next thing that we are going to do, based on the finish time comparator, we are going to sort the activities inside activity list that we created over here. So it's going to be like this. So as we said before, here we have changed it based on the finish time. So that's why if we sort the activity list using collection sort, it's going to sort them based on the finish time comparator that we declared over here. So in this case, finish time comparator compares the activities based on their finish time over here. So as we mentioned in our pseudocode before, the first step over here for activity selection is sorting the activity list based on the finish time. So it's going to be collection.sort activity list. So we are going to use finish time comparator that we have declared over here. Then after doing so, I'm going to create previous activity and assign the first activity from the activity list to this previous activity over here. So it's going to be like this: activity. So it's going to be type of activity. So the name of activity will be previous activity is equal to activity list dot get with the index of 0. So in this case, it's getting the first activity from this activity list over here, because in this case, when we are declaring the previous activity, we have to set the first activity to this activity over here. Then we are going to print out the first activity to the console, saying that it's going to start from here. So I'm going to call print function like this: system out println. So I'm going to put it like this. So I'm going to put to enter function over here. So then I'm going to recommend the schedule. Then I'm going to put first activity over here. So it's going to be concatenated with the activity list dot get with the index of 0. So it's going to get the first activity from the list. Then I'm going to loop through the activity list and compare activities to get the recommended activities. So in this case, if the activity start time is greater or equal to previous activity's finish time, then we are going to print it over here. So our loop will be like this. For each activity, so int I start from 1 because we have already printed out the first activity to the console, so that's why it's going to start from the 1 instead of 0, and it will continue until the end of activity list. So it's going to be activity list.size, and in each time it's going to increase by 1. Then inside this loop we are going to get the activity and compare this activity's start time with the previous activity's finish time. So in this case it's going to be like activity is equal to activity list get based on the index of I, because we are going to get one by one all of them. So then if condition will be like this: if activity dot get start time is greater or equal to previous activity's finish time, in this case we are going to print out this activity. So it's going to be a previous activity dot get finish time. Then in this case we are going to print out that activity to the console, because this activity will be selected as a recommended schedule. So in this case it's going to be like this: print activity. So if you print the activity, it's going to print out this part of activity class over here, because in this case we have overridden to string method over here. So it's going to be printed out that way. Then we are going to set the current activity to the previous activity, because in this case we are going to continue to the next activity. So this means that current activity in the next stage will be the previous activity. Now with this, we have successfully implemented our activity selection method based on the algorithm that we discussed in our previous lecture. Now let's see how this is working in practice. So inside main class, we are going to create the activities that we discussed in our previous lecture. So then we are going to find the activity selection problem for the activities that we discussed in our previous lecture. So as you remember, our activity list was like this. So here we have start and finish times for these activities. So here I'm just going to create these activities over here. Then based on the activity selection problem, we are going to find out the activity selection problem for these activities over here. Now the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to import ArrayList from Java util library, because here we are going to create a list of the activities. So then inside main method, we are going to create activities one by one. The first thing that we're going to do, we are going to create the array list with the type of activity. So it's going to be activity list is equal to new array list with the type of activity. Then based on the activity class, we are going to create our activities and add to this activity list over here. So it's going to be like this: activity list dot add. So we are adding new activity. So it's obvious that it's going to take the 3 parameters. So the first parameter is the name of activity, then the second parameter start time, and the third parameter is the end time. So then, as we said before, so we have 6 activities. So I'm just going to pass this line of code over here 6 times. So after passing it, I'm going to edit these parts like this. So the second activity is A2. So the start time of A2 is 3 and the end time of A2 is 4. And the third activity is A3, and the start time of A3 is 1 and end time of A3 is 2. And the third activity is A4, and the start time of A4 is 5 and the end time of A4 is 8. And fifth activity is A5, and the start time of this activity is 5 and end time of this activity is 7. Then the last activity is A6, and the start time of this activity is 8 and the end time of this activity is 9. Now after doing so, we have created activities as it's shown in this picture over here. Then I'm going to call activity selection for this activity list that we created over here. So if I call activity selection method, in this case, it's going to print out recommended schedule for these activities over here. So it's going to be like this: activity selection dot. So we are going to take this method that we created over here, activity selection. So then it's going to be like this. So we are going to call it for this activity list over here. Now after doing so, if I run our method, you'll see that it's printed out the recommended schedule over here. So as you remember, in our previous lecture, when we solved this problem, our recommended schedule was like this. The first activity was A3, then A2, then A5, then A6 over here. So here it's printing out the start and end times of these activities over here. So the activity A3 starts from 1, ends at 2, and the activity A2 starts from 3 and ends at 4. and activity A5 starts from 5, ends at 7, and activity A6 starts from 8 and ends at 9. So this is the recommended schedule for these activities over here. So with this, we have successfully implemented our activity selection method in Java. Now let's see what's the time and space complexity for this method over here. So as always, we are going to start from the first line of this method. So in the first line, we have declared the method like this, in which we are just overriding the compare function over here. So this means that this declaration of the finish comparator will take O1 time complexity, and overriding of the compare function over here also will take O1 time. Then we are sorting this activity list over here. So sorting activity list will take O(n) log n time complexity, because in this case you can use any sorting algorithm. So if you use the sorting algorithm, so for this case it will take O(n) log n time. Then we are creating previous activity over here and set the first activity to this previous activity over here. So this will take O1 time complexity. Then we are printing out first activity to the console. So this one also will take O1 time complexity. Now at the end, we are looping through all activities over here. So this loop will take O(n) time complexity. Now inside this loop, we are getting the activities one by one and comparing them based on the start and end times. So this means that these lines of code over here will take O1 time complexity. Then inside this if condition, we are just printing out the activity to the console and setting the current activity to the previous activity. So these lines of code also will take O1 time complexity. Now if we combine all these complexities over here, we will get O(n) log n time complexity, because in this case we are going to eliminate the non-dominant terms, so it remains only O(n) log n time complexity. Now for activity selection method, the space complexity will be O1, because in this case an extra space is not required to perform activity selection problem. Now with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, we have implemented activity selection in Java, and we have learned what is the time and space complexity for this problem over here. So hopefully everything is clear about this method. So see you in the next lecture.